There we are. We're doing this live for the first time, so I don't know who's watching online, but if you are, hello. And yeah, well, you're already here, and we encourage you to show up if you can make it. If you can't, then Mark, you posted this on Facebook, huh? It should be, I think. Testing 1, 2. I can turn it up louder. Maybe there's 2 controls. Hello, testing 1, 2. Testing. I see it going up, so it should be. Huh? Yeah, because I'm not even on the thing. There you go. Oh, it was Paul. Anyhow, where was I? Yes. So anyhow, in the agenda, we've got introductions we're going to do. We'll have September meeting minutes. Hopefully, Mark has those. Treasury report. I don't have a treasury report. Linda's not here. She didn't send me anything. I don't believe there's been any change other than probably a few dues that came in. Some old business, some new business announcements. I don't have any. And we do have a guest speaker tonight, Don Carlton, W3DC. He's going to talk about NVIS. So we'll go start with the introductions. My name is Kevin, N1ERS, and I'm from the city of Gardner. Bill's up.
Bill, N1UZ from the town of temporarily Winchendon.
Charlie KT1I from Winchendon, permanent. IPO, manager.
Ron, KT1BAK. Alan, K1UCY.
I'm Don, W3DEC, Northborough, Mass, transient.
Transient.
Paul, W1FCX, Cardinal.
Mark, KT1AHD,
And Jack, W1PSZ, Ashburn.
Excellent. Thank you all for coming and saying hello. What's up?
Pardon?
You on Lemonster anymore?
No, I sold the house.
Virtual? Yeah.
So, secretary report from our last meeting. Mark, would you like to stand up and do it, or do you just want to do it from there?
You gotta stand.
No, we can zoom the camera over to you.
Sold the laptop, so.
Report was current balance. Oh, thank you. Current balance was $857.77. Let's see. We discussed contesting QSL cards. We were waiting on some N1MM info from the contest that we had done. We discussed Logbook of the World, old field day logs. Doug was going to send some logs to Bill that we had sent out, and we had sent out 50 QSL cards. New business, we had discussed JOTA, which was October 16th. We discussed coordinators and our goals, the community coordinator, technical coordinator, social coordinator, and contesting. Let's see, Paul had volunteered to work on the technical coordinating. Social would have been Bill and Shirley, with Shirley leading. And contesting, Doug volunteered to lead. We discussed annual membership show and tell regarding technical topics. We had some announcements. The repeater on Mount Wachusett. Discussed technical details of that. Discussed VTVMs. We had a 50-50 raffle. And Kevin made a presentation on HF propagation.
All right. All right. So that was last month's meeting. Oh, gotta move the camera. I need a camera operator. Bill, want to be the camera operator? So motion to accept the minutes.
Make a motion to accept.
Motion by Bill. Seconded by Pete. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Nothing heard. Meeting minutes are approved. Like I said, I don't have a treasurer's report. Linda did not send me anything this month, and she's not present. So I don't believe there's been much change in there. I will work with her to try to keep getting these reports from her, but she didn't get one to me this time. So old business, we have, we've kind of officially made appointees to some positions in the club. So we have our, these aren't, Community Outreach Coordinator, Bill Ledger, has been doing an excellent job in getting us speakers and other activities going. Thank you, Bill. Our Social Activity Coordinator, who's on the West Coast, so she must be getting us, she's coordinating a trip to California, maybe. But Shirley Clark has agreed to take over that. Doug, who's not here this evening, agreed to assist with contest activities, and club technical coordinator will be Paul, and he'll be coordinating any activities that we'll do for technical things. So appreciate all of you taking on those roles, and we'll look forward to working with you and getting things scheduled and keeping the club really active with a lot of things. So I got a JOTA recap to go over, and Billy probably can speak about that too. And I was hoping we could talk about new QSL cards, but Matt and Jess are not here, so won't have much on that. So Jamboree on the Air, the Mohawk Amateur Radio Club and the Montechusett Area Radio Club co-sponsored a Jamboree on the Air, which is an event for Boy Scouts of America. And we had we set up 2 stations. We had one on PSK 31 and another one on sideband and FM, Smoka repeaters. And let's see, we had, from what I read, 47 Boy Scouts were in attendance, so we had a good number of people there as far as attendees for Boy Scouts. The limited number of contacts made, at least on HF, because the band conditions were not that great, and it was a little difficult to try to coordinate talking to the kids and getting on the air at the same time. So it was a little tough to do both. The contacts were mostly made from the U.S. We had most luck just working some FM repeaters. So overall, it was a good event. Bill, you got anything to add to it?
No, I think, wasn't Paul doing the Echolink also, and he hooked up with somebody in Singapore?
I don't know either. I know he was on Echolink, you're right. I don't know what contacts he made with that.
There's a lot of activity. A lot of kids are wicked interested.
Yes.
Especially in the TSK, I think he drew more of a crowd than we did outside.
Right.
And Paul had a steady crowd all day
Really?
with the Echolink. He always had like 4 or 5 kids around. Great event, very short notice.
Yep.
Didn't really have time to get it organized the way we would like to have it organized.
Right.
Bad conditions are horrible. Where they wanted us to set up, there was power lines, and we weren't going to do that.
Right.
Next year will be better if we do it.
Yeah. So yeah, we only had 2 volunteers from our club, and again, as Bill mentioned, it was short notice, but we plan on doing this again next year, and hopefully we'll get some more volunteers from the club for that. So hopefully we can do that again. And they were also mentioned that they're possibly interested in attending either ours or Mara's field day event just to show up. So, so I think a lot of them were interested.
One definite ham out of it. His name is Wernham, and he is from Townsend. His father might be a ham, but his grandfather is. So
right.
That will happen. I think he's going to bring his friend Corey along with him.
So this meeting, or two?
No, maybe Pittsburgh more likely.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, it's more out that way. Yeah.
We did our job.
Yep. So yeah, so overall it was a good event. Like I said, it was kind of a last notice thing, or last minute thing, but we pulled it together and it worked out good. The trailer worked out good, so yeah, look forward to doing something like that again next year. So new business. I'm trying to move along quickly because we do have Don who's going to speak. So we're batted around the ideas. The officers are batted around the idea of getting a club PO box. I'm talking with Paul, and I sort of remember this myself. We used to have an official club PO box back when it was in Athol. So I looked into pricing on PO boxes. They vary from city to city. You think it'd be a standard thing. East Templeton is $48 a month. No, a year. 43 was it? $43 a year, where Gardner is like 100 and something. So I'm all for just getting a PO box at the cheaper place over in East Templeton. It's right there at the intersection of 2A and 101. That little, huh?
Why?
Just so we can have an official PO box. We can have things sent to the PO box. QSL cards can be sent to that.
Well, the big stuff to me now.
Right.
And if we're gonna have a PO box, it should be me and Linda, so she can get the money.
Well, you know, I mean, officers and stuff are going to bounce around from time to time, so, I mean, ideally, I'd like to have it in Gardner, but, you know, money-wise, I figure we'll just go with the cheaper option for $43 instead of 100 and something dollars. So, anyhow, yeah, I just think it'd be convenient to have a P.O. box for the club where we can have all QSL cards, official correspondence sent to. Like I said, we had one in the past. You know, we have an email address, we have a website, we have all that. I figure why not do snail mail as well. So I'll open it up to, I guess it really needs to be a motion. So I'll make a motion, I guess if I can, that the club go ahead and purchase annually a P.O. box, preferably at East Templeton for the price factor. So, someone seconded? Seconded by Mark, and now discussion. So,
I personally think it's a total waste of money. Do what you want, you know. But it's $43 we don't have. We have a hard time coming up with porta potty money. It's equal, $43 is 3 memberships. $43 time we have to go to Templeton to get our mail versus right here in Gardner. I still think it should be located next to Linda. I just think it's okay the way it is.
okay.
I don't say you need to spend the money if we don't need to spend it.
Any other discussion about the P.O. box?
I think it adds a level of completeness to having it regardless of where it's located. That can be really,
No,
depends on how you intend to use it.
What do we get for mail?
QSL cards. How many do we get?
2 packages. The checks, Linda collects them here. It really is a waste of money. I don't think you get any mail. We'll definitely get an extra Stop and Shop flyer on Friday.
I thought they moved.
Yeah, there's no more Stop and Shop, but it'd be Tops.
And by the way,
But-
you can get Salem hot dogs.
What's that?
You can get Salem hot dogs. Ah, and Weber's.
You know what's good? Is their ice cream. Tops ice cream. Better than Ben and Jerry's.
How we doing on time?
They figured you have to get somebody to check it every.
Well, that would be either me, Jack, Mark, probably, you know, whoever the officers would be, or Linda. I think the officers, whoever they may be, year to year, would have access to the box.
That's over, what, Pinker's Road? Right?
Yeah, it's right there at the intersection.
Next door where Steve used to live.
Yeah, I think where the old Cumberland's was.
I don't know what that is.
It's the
Yeah, you
brick
got-
building immediately to the left. So you got the intersection of 101 and 2A, and then immediately to your left is a brick building. Cumberland's used to be in there, and the post office is there. East Templeton Post Office. The main post office is further up 2A in the center of town.
Well, if we can get the former N1 FDR off his ass, and get his license again, he can pick it up on his way home from work.
Right.
Yeah.
So any other discussion, thoughts, ideas?
P.O. Box,
That's going to be a standard thing, but I'm sure something large comes in. They're just going to hold it behind the counter.
It'll be about 3 inches wide, 4 inches high.
regular order,
All right. I'm sure if large items come in, they'll hold it.
Yeah.
Behind the counter. It's standard.
What was it, 47 a year?
43?
43? I think it would be nice when we publish things and as we start doing more social media stuff and being more public to be able to address. I think the 43 is a quarter.
No, it was yearly,
43 years,
annually.
not 6 months.
That's awful low.
Yeah, because he was comparing some other places.
Well, I know Gardner bills every 6 months. I pay for mine every 6 months.
Okay. How much do you pay? Yeah.
$139 now, it used to be $70.
For the year?
No,
Or every 6 months? Really?
I paid 90 for 6 months in Gadsden.
Maybe it's 6 months. I thought it was annually, but well, if it's only 6 months, then that doubles the price, and yeah, maybe it's not worth it.
We should try it. You can always rescind it.
Hmm?
Discuss it.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll take a vote on it, I guess. So any,
You don't have to vote on it now.
no?
Make a motion, we table it.
All right. So we'll table this to the next meeting, and we'll discuss it further. We'll get some definitive thing if it's 6 months or annually.
Okay, that would be the reason too.
Yep. So, all right. So we'll table that. Our November guest speaker, I didn't get his name put in the thing,
His
but
name
his
is, I believe it's Dan Senni. Anybody can correct me on it. He's a fox hunting guru. He is from Chelmsford. I was in such a hurry tonight when I left the house, I didn't get his call sign. He is the fox hunting guru.
Yep. He's done talks at Foxborough, and it's really
What's that?
He was. I thought, yeah, his wife and one JIT.
I'm saying the name, no, I'm saying the name wrong. It's gotta be. I don't think so.
So that'll be for November. It should be a really interesting meeting for sure. So make sure you come by for that. Tell everybody you know to come by for that. December, we're still planning an annual, hopefully an annual club show and tell, which will be bring in or talk about anything that you're interested in, particularly in the amateur radio hobby, if you can, or anything in that idea. So get your ideas ready and stuff like that. We're going to work out sort of the logistics, but probably give like each person, depending on how many people say they're going to come, we'll give each person like 10 or 15 minutes. This will be all after the meeting, and you can talk about all your things. So grab your gadgets and things like that. It'll be a fun time to just show people stuff you have or stuff you know, stuff you like, and just let everybody else know a little bit about it. In January, we'll be having our holiday dinner, our post-Christmas dinner, and that's to be determined where and when. It probably,
Is everybody okay with the Ale House again?
yeah, I don't see why
I think
not.
we are still gonna be limited to 28.
All right.
So it's first come, first served, but we didn't have a problem last year, or the year before.
We didn't.
No, we're
It
fine.
went off well.
Yep.
Yeah, it did. The girls were very nice, they were accommodating. Food was excellent.
So,
All right, so I'm gonna book that.
Want to have any quick discussion on date?
Regular meeting.
last year we held it separate from the meeting, so we could keep the meetings going. So I'm open to either way. We can forego the meeting and make that the meeting, and that'll be one less meeting we have throughout the year. Or we can do a separate date and keep the meeting. So preferably if we do it earlier in the month, so it's not right on top of the club meeting.
When did we have it last year?
I think it was club night, meeting night.
So
Was it?
It was at the end of January?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and the year before, I was still, but I don't care, it makes no difference to me.
And I'd like to get an extra meeting in.
Yeah, I prefer that too. I'd like to keep the meetings rolling and then have that as an extra thing. Like, yeah,
Okay, you wanna do it the second Wednesday of the month?
That'd be great.
sure, something like that, or any day, whatever. It doesn't have to be a Wednesday, but Wednesday's good. So,
Yeah, that's far enough from the holiday and yet.
Yep.
Far enough
from the meeting. So,
Second Wednesday would be the 11th, and that does conflict with NARA. So you wanna make it the 3rd, 18th?
sure. Or we can do
On the
it,
fourth.
or we can do it,
To,
or we can do it Tuesday.
Yeah.
Or Thursday.
you tell me, I'm just gonna go home.
Let's do it the second, Tuesday? Second week.
It would be the
Second.
10th.
Yeah, that pulls it a day away from the Mara meeting,
Okay.
so they can come also.
Okey dokey.
All right.
Any problem,
Anybody got a problem with that?
Sounds good. So I went over the show and tell thing, so if you have something you want to show or talk about, be held after the regular club meeting. Subject should be electronic or amateur radio related, and we'll give each person about 10 or 15 minutes for that. We'll firm that up a little more.
Just a comment on that, we're gonna be putting out a request for presenters once we get into November. So kind of be thinking about it, what you might like to bring and how much time you think you might like to have. Put something out, get it back in, and then we'll collate it and put together a meeting for December.
Yep. So yep, get your ideas together. I don't have any announcements, other than what we already discussed. Does anybody in the
Yeah.
club have announcements for?
I just want, Jack and I have been threatening to get together and have a meeting about possibilities of speakers. We haven't had that meeting yet. However, we did compose an extensive list of about 20 to 22 speakers, something like that, and different events that we can possibly. So we are going to be booked all year, without doubt. Something every month. We've got enough to bring us up into next year, and I'm sure new things will pop up. We've got some good speakers from H.L. Varel lined up. Dawn is on our list.
Yep.
Volunteer right away. We've got some good guys.
Yeah.
It's going to be a good year.
And in conjunction with that, we're gonna book a card sort for here, W1 card sort for here in the springtime, probably month of March-ish, so as to not conflict with the Mara sort.
Charlie, Jack, and I just went down to Purple last Wednesday, and we did 15,000 cards in an hour and a half. Sorted them all by one letter, the letter after the number. Yeah, that's
All right.
the suffix letter. And there's 28 people there, and the club supplied pizza and soda afterwards, and it was a really, really good social night. So
Great.
we'll do the same here. Take the money that we're not going to spend on the post office for nice pizza.
Right. Okay. So we have lots of things that we really are going to have planned for the club, in addition to all our big events we do, such as Field Day, our two big events, Field Day and the Relay for Life event. So we've got lots going on. We really need lots of participation. I know there's only a few of us here tonight, but, you know, when you talk to other club members or other members at large who aren't members of the club currently or whatnot, tell them, hey, you know, we've got a lot going on. Join up the club. We'd love to have everybody participate, and we're really going to try to make an effort to keep things going here. So,
Might sneak in an ice cream social too, or a hot dog social.
yeah, there might be a surprise thing. I might show up with cake one day, and, you know, food's always a
It'll
good.
be your show and tell.
Yep, cake. Cake in the shape of a radio. So upcoming club calendar, November 30th will be our regular meeting, followed by a presentation of Fox Hunt. And December will be the show and tell. As always, we have the new mock breakfast meetup. It'll be on November 12th, so that's always on the second Saturday of the month. We had a modest turnout. It was Paul, Jack, myself, and Bill came by and had some great breakfast and talked about this, that, and the other thing. So if you're not doing anything on a Saturday morning on November 12th, stop by and get some breakfast, cup of coffee, and have a good chat and stuff. There'll be another one on the 10th and our holiday dinner to be determined, but I guess we figured it'll be the second Tuesday of that. So we'll take a break for a couple minutes. I didn't bring the tickets. We're not going to do a 50-50 raffle because Kevin forgot the tickets. We'll take a little break. I'll let Don get set up. Oh, you have a couple announcements?
Yeah.
Would you like to be on camera for that?
Pete also has
I think the audio will do.
Okay.
Many of you may know, Dick Hancock, K101R.
Yeah.
He's looking to, liquidate his ham radio stuff. And, I only got a couple items left. One of which is an ICOM 775 DSP, contest DX class rig.
Nice radio.
Excellent radio. I got the radio, plugged it in, the receiver seems to be producing noise. I haven't tested the transmitter out yet. The display is a minor issue. It uses a fluorescent tube, and that tube is burned out. So I'm replacing that with LEDs, which I hope to have in by Friday or Saturday. Once I do that, I'm going to do a test on the transmitter. It's a very clean radio, and the last one that sold on eBay went for $1,300.
Yep.
eBay
saw
takes
that.
10% of that, so he's willing to take 15% off that $1,300. If anybody's interested in purchasing that radio, let me know. The second item, and I see we don't have any DTBMs here, so
Oh.
well, you're the only one.
I'm the default winner.
Apparently.
I'm going to extend the invitation once again for a private session in my lab to come on out and we'll get your DTMs up and running.
You have to remember to bring the
You
right
have to
one.
bring the right one. Oh, have I got a website for you? Remind me later. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you about it because I want everybody else to hear it too. I ran into this thing quite coincidental on YouTube, and it's a ham from New Hampshire, and he's talking about going to Nearfest, and he has a bunch of videos up called it $10 test bench. Every piece of equipment that he has, that he purchases and rehabs, none of it has cost him more than $10. And a significant amount of it was, here, you can have this for free. And he's got some really nice stuff. Shows you how to refurb it on, right on the videos and everything. So it's, just go to YouTube and search $10 test bench, and you'll come up with this guy. The radio mechanic, he calls the site. So it's really great. And citing Jack here, he came over to do this CTBM thing, and he brought the wrong meter. He brought the transistorized meter, so we had the opportunity to look at that, and it turns out this guy has found a similar meter on Nearfest to what Jack had. Now I know where all the wires go and why there's no battery holder, because you solder the wires to the battery. So anyhow, yeah, look that up. It's guy's really good. They're a little on the lengthy side, but he goes into nice plain English explanation. He says he's doing this for the youngsters, for the kids, right, who want to get into electronics and don't have the financial wherewithal to do it. But if you're going to be doing anything with old radios, you really want to have certain pieces of old test equipment to work on the old radio. It's a great site. So everybody, please enjoy that. I know I thoroughly have. So that's it for me.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Great. Pete?
For those interested, the moving wall is going to be in Leominster next week. And
Where, Pete?
it arrives on the 2nd.
Where?
Carter Park.
Carter
Right on Route 12, downtown, where St. Louis Church is.
Yes. Yeah.
Park across the street.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Very good.
And that's when?
It's arriving Tuesday, the 2nd.
Right, the replica of the Vietnam Memorial Wall.
Version.
Yes, they have.
They've had it at the Mount Wachusett a couple of years ago, and it's
Never seen it.
it's really something, yeah. So, good. Any other announcements?
Just, the single emotional is it. I've never been to the wall in Washington. It's one of my dreams someday to go to when the wall first came to Gardner, I took a week off from work, and I was security up there on the wall, just because I got so involved with it. They're very emotional time. And when I had the bike, I used to ride all over the place, wherever the wall was.
I have been to the one in Washington, and it's everything that you say that it is anymore.
Right.
Like I said, I've never been to that, only in the days, I might get there. But,
Great.
nowadays, I don't do a lot of traveling, so I found out the other day, it's going to be Mondays for next week.
Excellent.
Gotcha. Yep, thank you.
I want to pass that on for whatever it's worth.
Good to know. Good to know. All right, with that, don't leave. I'm going to lock the door. We're going to let Dawn get set up. I'm going to either pause the video or pause the audio, or both, and let Dawn get set up for that. And we'll have a presentation on NVIS, which you probably are doing already, but don't even know about it. You're going to want to use, I'll get to that, but let me just...
No?
I don't know.
Gotta wait for the delay. Slow down for a second. I just, I'm not there.
Can you hear me now?
Might actually be a little loud,
I think that's close enough, but if they get closer, it'll probably
I don't know.
overdrive it.
It's over.
Okay, shall I start? Okay, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, members of Mohawk Amateur Radio Club, for inviting me here today. My name is Don Carlton, W3DEC. I'm an extra class ham. I'm going to move this down because I've already noticed the flashlight showing on it. That's probably not good. I'm an extra class ham. I'm a member of this Central Mass Amateur Radio Association. I live in Northborough, Mass. My experience in radio and communications, I started out in the early 1980s in the Air Force as a enlisted guy, as a telecommunications specialist. I worked on cryptographic machines and wire communications, but we went all the way up through basic radio theory because we ended up supporting other shops and doing radio schemes because the radios fed the teletypes often. In communications, I worked for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency for 23 years. And during that, the latter half of that, I was a deputy operations officer, and I retired from there as operations manager. And at the time, the way it was organized, all of NEMA's communications fell under my department, and I managed the communications department as well as operations statewide. And so I worked with Motorola contractors and other contractors and all sorts of, at that time, everything, including telephone
and the only thing we didn't do was internet. That was state IT. I currently work for the government in government communications, and I basically am responsible for emergency communications within the New England region, basically everything except telephone, landline, cell phone, and internet. If it's any other form of communication, basically it's my responsibility to ensure that we can communicate with Washington. And so I've been doing that for several years now. So I came up with, we talk about subjects sometime with our federal partners, and so some of this is to deal with other federal partners in the military, in Coast Guard, and you'd be surprised how many federal operators also use HF radio, including the CDC has a large network of HF, Automatic Link Establishment, HF, which I'll talk about. And they are basically got contacts with radios and hospitals and state EOCs that they like to talk to. So I wanted to put together something on NVIS communications, and we'll talk about it, probably the hams, and some of the military are more familiar with it. So I put together a presentation on NVIS, and we'll talk about it here. Okay, what is NVIS? Well, it means Near Vertical Incident Skywave, or sometimes it's called Near Vertical Incident Propagation. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is that, okay, let me start waltzing with that. What I want to talk to you today about is that it is not a form of propagation, though I've heard it called Near Vertical Incident Propagation. It's not a form of propagation. Propagation is propagation is propagation. It's been there since the ionosphere was created. It's an operating technique. It is an operating technique which sometimes requires you to use special antennas, but it's not a form, it's not a mode like digital or voice, and it's not a type of propagation. It uses the same propagation that radio has always used since the early 20th century. It's an operating technique, and I'm going to talk to you about how it's used and how you can use it. It means Near Vertical Incident Skywave, and it's the opposite of DX, which you amateurs know is long distance HF communications. Sometimes you use other forms like 6 meter, and you could possibly use 2 meter, but usually it refers to HF radio. So it's the opposite of going DX. And it is a local or medium length communication, depending on communication conditions under atmospherics, to about 250 statute miles reliably. But I can get further than that. Depends on power, like anything else, power, propagation, what antenna you're using, and your antenna location. So I'm going to get over on this. I'm going to get over on this side, I guess. Okay, nearest by other names. It's called the Australian District Antenna down in Oz, in the southern hemisphere. It's called that because still to this day, Australian, both government and individuals, make extensive use of HF radio because it's a continent, and it's a huge continent, and it's a mostly empty continent, except the vast majority of the population live on the East Coast. There are population centers on the West Coast, a couple on the Northeast Coast near New Guinea, but the rest of the country is pretty much empty. And there are farming stations, ranching stations, and these individuals stay in touch, a lot like some of our Alaskan counterpart, hams, basically stay in touch with each other by HF radio. And they call it, so they're very familiar with that, and one of the better manufacturers of antennas for HF down there called I think it's Bushmaster, but it's in there. They also make an NVIS antenna. So, Russian zenith radiation. The Russians call it zenith radiation, and yes, the Russians have been using NVIS, as you can see, from very early on. So they were pioneers. So, Marine showerhead antenna. Okay? I think that's, U.S. Marines call it the showerhead effect. And we'll see in a minute why the Marines call it that. But of all our armed forces, the Air Force started to use it. They used it limited a bit, as we'll see, during Vietnam. But the Marines have always been big ever since Vietnam on NVIS propagation, and we'll see that. Also called short-range ionospheric propagation, or using the ionosphere for short-range reliable communication. So that's what it's also called. We call it generally NVIS, or NIVIS is, if you want to call it for short, NIVIS, but NVIS. And by the way, if you have any questions, small group here, just shout them out, and I'll answer them if I can, or I'll try to find out the answer. There's a lot of information out there. So I'm just going to review with those of you, I'm sure you're all hams here, but some of you may not use HF extensively as other hams, so I'm just going to basically go over quickly. This is conventional propagation, as you can see. You've got a ground wave which goes out basically curvature of the Earth plus a certain 25% or whatever, ground wave. Then you have sky wave, which most of us in HF use, and if you want to have DX, that's what you hope to use. You hope to get a big skip, a big bounce off the ionosphere and come down where you can get, some foreign station or some station in, Alaska, Hawaii, wherever in the United States. So that's normal communications. Now, what happens when you're here? Oftentimes. What happens if you have a station here, and there's a station here talking, a station here talking, and you're here? And guys that run HF a lot. You're not hearing it, you're hearing a really lousy signal, right? It's noisy because you're getting a lot of interference. You're getting really weak path propagation, and basically the power is jumping over you. And we're also a phenomenon clear with this with WBZ, for example, is a clear channel station, meaning that at night there's nobody else on their frequency, and they really crank up the power. And you can hear them in New Brunswick, you can hear them in North Carolina. I've been in the military down in the South and picking them up. In 38 states, they say, that you can hear them in 6 Canadian provinces. But if you happen to be out here in Gardner at night sometimes, again, it's bouncing right over us, and we're getting what's shining down from the sky that's very weak. So this is normal propagation. So if you want to talk to a distant station, and I'm talking, down in Texas or down in the Caribbean, this may work in one bounce. But if you want local, and you're out of ground wave, which is really relatively short for HF, and not that great, as we'll see, or skywave, you really didn't have any way of getting and filling in this gap here if you wanted medium-range communications, or even reliable short-range communications on HF. Okay, to travel a long distance, you must have a low takeoff angle. Okay, and I'm talking low relative, and we'll see in the illustration, relative to the Earth, a shallow angle to take off. And that gets you the best possibility for DX. Is that a hand? Okay. That's the best possibility for DX, is shallow angle. We're all hoping to get that for DX. 30 degrees or less. Relatively 30 degrees or less. And that's so. Obviously, you can go as far as it can before it hits the ionosphere and skips down. Okay? Okay, now we've talked about that, I showed you. That long gap, when it's bouncing off the ionosphere underneath, that's a skip zone, and it can be if the atmospherics are right that night, you can hear the other stations perhaps, but they can't hear you. Sometimes that's part of the phenomenon, or you can't hear anything but long distance stations. We'll talk about that. Okay, so there it is. Now we go NVIS propagation. Now this is where we talked about, get over there. That's where we talked about the showerhead effect. That's why they call it showerhead radiation. Zenith, by the way, the Russians refer to as zenith, and it's the Russian word for zenith, meaning very straight up overhead almost, very high, the zenith. So, as you can see, we're out to 200 statute miles from our station. And also, if you're trying to use ground wave and you've got stations that are in holes or stations that are blocked by terrain, ground wave won't work. Terrain will block ground wave as it will any other, like a repeater. And here, as you can see, the idea is to bounce it up high and bring it down so that you've got good coverage and most of your energy is being distributed 200 miles either side of your antenna. And I'm going to say generally in an omni, though there are directional antennas where you can do this, it's mostly omni. Okay? So that is graphically how it looks as opposed to low angle takeoff. This is high angle takeoff. High meaning going right up to the sky. Okay, so here we said 30 degrees, right? So now we want 60 to 90 degrees. 90 is, ideally 90, we go straight up and straight down. Generally speaking, as we'll see, 90 is not the practical. 90 is the ideal, but 90 is not really achievable, and we'll see why. So you want to be 60 to 90 degrees of takeoff. So 90 degrees would be right angle to the ground, I'm talking. And 60 degrees would be above 45, and the 30 for DX is really, really low. So, and it returns from the ionosphere at the exact same angle, like a pool bank. Okay? It just comes back at the same angle, and the coverage is about 250 statute miles. And again, as you'll see, some of this, as we get further into it, was made for government operators, military operators, not just hams. NIVIS. So therefore, it fills that skip zone. It fills that skip zone up with energy that normally would bounce over it. However, that also means that it's not going to go very far beyond that, because too many bounces, especially daytime, as we'll see, you're going to have absorption for the D layer, and you're not going to get out that far. But you don't want to, because your idea is you want to have a reliable local to medium range HF network. Okay, so we saw that. Using NVIS or NIVIS successfully. You want to have high angle from your antenna. You want to have high angle from your antenna. You want to minimize any ground wave, because ground wave is going to cause multiple paths. And what happens when you get guys that do HF? Flutter, or it's going to sound a little garbled, wobbly, because it's all going to come in microseconds apart, and it's going to sound like kind of garbled. So you want to minimize that. Most importantly is choosing your band. Most importantly, more than your antenna, and we'll see why, and more than trying to eliminate ground wave, which is usually just happens on its own. Ground wave just gets absorbed locally by terrain, trees around here. The main thing is knowing what frequency to use. If you go too high in frequency, what's going to happen, you get up towards 10 meters, and it's going to act like VHF. Oftentimes, when 10 meters is, sometimes 10 meters is like VHF, and sometimes 10 meters wants to be HF or VHF, depending upon the atmospherics. If it's up too high, towards 10 meters, 12 meters, like that, what's going to happen is it's going to go right through the ionosphere at that high angle and keep going right out into outer space. And you don't want that, because no one's going to hear you. So, but too low a frequency, and we'll see why you don't want to do too low a frequency. So you've got to be aware of what's the best frequency to use under conditions and time of day, and we'll see that. Okay, the ionosphere, right? You've got the D, the E, and the F1 and the F2 layers. That's what we deal with. D, and to lesser extent E, absorb HF. So the more bounces you go through during the D layer, which is there, we'll see, during the daytime, the more bounces you go through the D layer, the more of your energy is absorbed, which why sometimes DX during the daytime is problematic, because of D layer, what you call D layer absorption. Okay, the E layer does that to some extent. Sometimes it bounces, sometimes it absorbs. And the E layer exists during the daytime as well, and we have to deal with that. The best return is from the F2 layer during the day, and we'll see a graphic of this in a minute. And at night, what happens to the F1 and the F2? They combine into F layer. During the day, and we'll see, they break apart into another layer. So at any given time, any given time, you need to know, or at least to make a scientific wag about what is the critical frequency that will reflect effectively off that F2 layer, which is called the critical frequency, or FOF2. If you see this, you may have seen this before, if you ever mess around, and we're going to look at the radio stations like Millstone Hill Observatory that does this. We're going to show this. You might have seen that F over F2 guys that do a lot of HF talking about that, especially if they're trying to do a little local rag shoot. Okay? When you know what the F2 critical frequency for F2, FOF2 is, then you want to go and be about 10% below the critical frequency. Whatever the critical frequency is, you want to be roughly, you don't want to be right on it, you want to be about 10% below it or below. You can go even further below, but you don't want to get above more than, say, get within 90% of that F2, because then it's going to start going off into space. So we'll see that. This is the ionosphere. Okay, here I have it up here. When does this occur? When do you think this is? What time of day this is? It's daytime, and why is that?
The F1 and F2 are separate.
And we have what else that we don't have at night? The D layer goes away at night. What's, pardon?
A rainbow?
Well, it's used colors. This is a rainbow. Don't get me going, Kevin. Because this is going on live podcast TV to the world, and I got to be a good boy. But what's happening is the sun is energizing of the ionosphere. The sun is pouring energy in the ionosphere. The sun is creating these layers. The sun is pumping energy and cranking them up and making them powerful. So the F1 and F2 layer, also what's happening, what is also a factor in this, in addition to radiation power, what else is another effect? What happens during the day that usually doesn't happen at night, except maybe this real hot summer? The day is usually what? Hotter than the night. Okay? And it's heat also. This is and the scientists will tell you, the ionosphere is hotter as well, temperature-wise, during the day. It's the temperature. Now, we're talking relative, because it's like 50 below zero up there, but it gets hotter, and they expand.
Particle density.
And it's the particles bouncing off one another. It's all heat comes from energy, comes from vibrating particles. So the more you put energy in them, the more they vibrate. And they create what? They create heat. And it causes everything to expand. And it causes these layers to rise up in the atmosphere, higher than they normally are, too. So these are phenomena we're dealing with. Okay, and it gives you the heights in kilometers above the Earth. Well, that's really nice, but it's not critical to know. Okay, I'll get over here. Just try and be that voice off stage. In practice, we can go down to the 15 megahertz band, and the lowest can go down to 160 meters. So we can go from 15 megahertz to 1.8 megahertz. So what does that tell us about the HF band? What does it tell us about NVIS? What is the, HF guys that do a lot of HF, what is the distribution of bands from 160 meters at 1.81 to what? 10 meters, right? And what do we say is basically the top of the HF band? 29, right? Almost 30 megahertz. Well, what's 15? 20 meters, or a little above 20 meters, right? We're cutting half, you're losing half of the entire HF spectrum. Because generally speaking, you will not be able to get reliable NVIS above 15 megahertz. So now we're telling you the best you're ever going to do under any conditions is the bottom half of HF.
Except that, in that top portion, doesn't that give you the steeper angle?
Yes, but what happens is that during the day especially when the F1 and F2 layers are broken apart, they're not as dense. What happens is the higher frequencies go right through the ionosphere and go out into space. Not only is 10 meters acting like VHF, but the whole top half of the VHF spectrum is like VHF, and it's all going out into outer space. And it's not stopping and bouncing. So it's just gone.
At that high angle.
At that high angle. Now, have you got up on those higher frequencies and communicated and got DX? Sure you have. But what kind of angle takeoff do you think you were getting or using? Those lower 30, 45 degree, between 30 and 45 degree takeoff angles. Yeah, because now you're bouncing off the F2 layer at a much more oblique angle, and so you're kind of skipping a stone off a pond, as opposed to dropping the stone right in the pond that goes right down to the bottom of the lake. You're coming in at a shallow angle and bouncing it off. If you go directly, ideally 90 degrees, you'll punch right through those weak separated layers. Okay? Okay. You can go higher during the day, but you got to go lower at night. So in the evening and the afternoon, you got to use the lower frequencies at night. So at night, basically, you want good, reliable communications, you're talking 40 meters and below. How many people have rag chewed or rag chew on 80 meters? How many people have done 80 meters and talk, right, or used to or aware of it? Okay, around supper time, you go down either just before supper, right after supper. If you eat early supper, you go to the shack, and you go to 80 meters, and you're here in Gardner, and you're talking to Templeton, and you're talking to Worcester, and you're talking out to Shirley Littleton, and you're talking up to Hollis, New Hampshire, right? Like, then you're having a little local rag chew. What happens around 9:30, 10 o'clock at night? The band goes long. We're going to talk about this. The band goes long, and if you can't get down, and who's usually the only guys that can talk locally around that time? The guys and gals with? No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. You'll talk real loud to Texas, and that's where the big boomers from Texas come in. Those that have a 160-meter antenna, those that are capable of operating at 160 meters, they can still talk local all night long. And we'll see, and that's the phenomenon we're talking about, local. But surely, if you're at 20 meters at night, at 10 o'clock at night, you can go into, I have all the time. It's not that hard a shot. 40 meters is one of my favorite bands for DX, too. Into Scandinavia, UK, Northwest Europe. For me, that's an easy shot from my house when I had the antenna up at Leominster. No problem. But that's not what we want. We want NBIS, we want local. So the band goes long on you, and you got to try to sneak through the old limbo, right, under the bands. So, and it's also affected by time of year and sunspot cycle. And why is it affected by the time of year, the season of the year? What is our conditions we're approaching to this time of year, right tonight? Length of day, right? And I said that the sun is doing what to the HF for the ionosphere? It's charging it up and heating it up, right? Well, if you have less time of sunset hitting it, less energy, which means it's going to be less energetic and less likely to bounce. We all know that. A little harder to do DX and stuff in the wintertime, because as soon as that sun goes down, and that's why the band goes long. The reason the band's going long is that the longer the sun is down, the more the ionosphere is dropping lower, which means more likely you're going to get skipping, and it's leaning against energy, which means it's weaker, which means your higher frequencies are blasting right through it into space. So for best results, we have to use different frequencies. Like I said, you start out at 80 meters, and you can talk to Kevin like I'm across the street from 3 towns away. And then at 9:30 at night, I couldn't hear him, but I get the guy from Texas, Oklahoma coming through, right? And he can hear me. Yeah. So, the critical frequency is key to success in working NVIS technique. The critical frequency, or the FOF2, that's the highest one that you can, the highest frequency that you can transmit into space and expect that would come back down. Okay? We're interested in vertical signals for NVIS, therefore, the value of the critical frequency is of prime importance to us. Now, when we used to do local nets, we'd have the gurus that before I really got into this and understood this both the phenomenon and the technique, we'd be doing an 80-meter local rag chew when I was out west and southwest down in Sturbridge, and the guys would say, look at your F2. Go look at this site and see what's happening to the F2, FOF2, or we just call it the F2 for short. The F2 is going down now. It's approaching 2 meg. The band's going long, guys. It's all over. Better say 7 threes for the night. So we have to know this, but there are ways to know this. How can we estimate? Well, I can tell you this. What did I tell you about time of day? I told you, roughly, the daytime, try to start at 15 megahertz and start working your way down. Okay? What did I say about night? Especially later in the night. You gotta go real low. You gotta start at 40 meg and go down, and you might end up, being down there 80 meters, 160 meters, trying to find local coverage. So, you don't need anything. You need a clock. You need your eyes to see the darkness settling. Don't need anything. So you can guesstimate, well, I know I can't use anything above 15 megahertz during the day, and I probably can't do anything over 40 megahertz during the night. So let's start there, work our way down. Okay, so that's one way. But we have other ways. Okay, we call ionozones, meaning a device which is measuring the ionosphere. Okay, and those modern devices, those have been around really since about after World War II. Websites. There's lots of websites, and I'm going to give you, at the end of this presentation, there's 2 pages worth of links. And what I can do is you can copy this down, by the way, if you'd like to post this at the club website, so that people can go there and check these websites out for themselves to help them. Not only in NVIS, because there's a whole emergency management group around the country that specialize in using NVIS for local communications during emergencies. Because what if all the repeaters are taken out? And you want to talk locally about emergency management subjects? Well, HF ain't going to do it unless you're understanding NVIS techniques. So there's websites out there. Maps. And we'll get into that. And they're just kind of fun just for local propagation to understand. And it helps you to understand DX to some extent as well. Okay, software. The military, until very recently, with satellite links and more data available to them, until very recently in the latter half of the 20th century, they used paper almanacs, which predicted these things, and they would take them to the field so that military operators, commercial operators that were using NVIS technique would have paper charts. Now it's all available on that, and you can get computer programs that will run basically without an internet connection based on time of day and time of date and year. They can give you some ballparks. Rule of thumb, and I just told you that. Rule of thumb, just use if you understand this technique, then you're going to use time of day and year to understand what's happening, and you're not going to go up in frequency, you're going to go down. There we go, okay. Ionogram, from a dynazoned or ionozoned, okay? What you're seeing here is, what did I say, F what? That is an O. FOF2. Okay, what this is showing us is the ordinary, the extraordinary. This is megahertz at the bottom, and this is range in kilometers. And that's basically range straight up. It's not kilometers, it's up in the atmosphere. So, where is the critical frequency? Right in this particular graphic. FO2 is there, megahertz is here. There's 5 megahertz, it's a little bit what? It's a little bit higher than 5 megahertz, right? The critical frequency. And I said, and it shows there, that's ordinary propagation. Well, under extraordinary conditions, if you get really, really lucky, you might be able to go up to almost 6 meg. Okay? But we don't have, what do we have?
Meter band, we'll get you
6 megahertz is what? Do we have any privilege in 6? 60 meters, okay. But I don't think, but of course, again, military and government, we do have operating privileges interspaced between the hand bands all over the place. So, basically here, I said 10%, so let's say 5 megahertz is your critical frequency. So we want to be out or below 5 megahertz in any of our communications, okay, 60 meters or that. That's in this particular one. That's how you read them. This is a little harder one to read. This is the one, this is real time. This is, and I'm going to show you the website you can go to if you know where you are in the world. Basically, Haystack. I think it's Haystack, yo. It's not Millstone. Is it Millstone or Haystack? The same thing, right, I think? They have one in around Harvard or Boxborough, Mass. They have one of these. It's shooting essentially like a radar beam. It's an but they go from, well, they're using HF on this particular one. They use other ones to test the ionosphere. So they're shooting an HF beam over this spectrum up into the sky, straight up, 90 degrees, straight up. And they're recording when it comes back down.
That's one over on Route 40 in Groton.
Yeah, I don't think, no. I don't think it's Groton. This is Millstone Hill. I think that's Haystack. I think they're two different places. But this is local. But I don't know where this one is. This may not be that. Now, you got all this stuff up here. If you're interested in these frequencies, okay, maximum usable frequency, well, it's a DX. That's the MUF. But down here, actually, so what you've got, it looks like 40 meters here. So it'll tell you, if you want to communicate within 100 miles, you want to be at 8.6 megahertz. 200 miles, 8.7 megahertz. 9 megahertz to 400, no, those are kilometers. Excuse me, kilometers. Because all these scientific sites are in metric. So that's what so if you can look down the bottom and see how many kilometers. You can do the math, and how many kilometers away do I need to communicate? Well, this is the I got to be below this frequency. So these are real time. Every 5 minutes they update. Okay. So if you get used to using this, you just go down. I'll just go down here and look. That's all I use it for. A map. Here's one that's pretty easy. Okay. If I'm in southern Scotland, northern England, and I want to talk to my mates, as they say, in the next two villages over, what frequency am I going to use, you think? Or below? What frequency are we going to use to talk locally in the central British Isle there of southern Scotland, northern England? Okay? Make a guess. 5 megahertz is right. That's pretty easy. 5 megahertz. Now, if you're talking up here in Hamburg area, again, 5 megahertz. If you're up in I don't know if this is Paris or this. So about 5.5 megahertz if you want to do a local net in Paris. You follow that line. Anywhere in this line, the critical frequency is 5.5 megahertz. If you're down here in Rome and you want to do a local network in vicinity of central Italy, well, you'd go to 7.5 megahertz. Can we see this map? Right? Just learn how to read them. Okay, for the emitter, for the radio emitter. In practice, as I said, 7 megahertz, 40 meters, 7 megahertz is usually about the best you're going to do. really, I don't see it much over that. Occasionally I get up to 15 megahertz during the day, but it's rare. For all intents and purposes, we're talking a lower quarter. What the problem with people in NDIS, they make an NDIS antenna, they put it out there, and they're trying to operate at 20 meters. And it doesn't work. In fact, since it's configured to be an NDIS antenna, their DX propagation is real crappy, because it's not designed to do that. And so it's not working NDIS, it's not working at 20 meters either. So they're like, this doesn't work. And I said, what frequency are you on? So I don't know if that just went out on you. I don't know if that means anything. So 80 meters is next. It's usually where you start off at night. And top band, as we call it, 160, is at night, probably where a lot of you will end up if you want local propagation. So if you want to have a good, solid local net, I hope you have a lot of space, or you get a trap antenna that you can put up. You're going to need, how much for a 160? 256, I think it is. Pardon? 270 feet. Well, you could shorten it a little because electrically it doesn't matter, but you can shorten it a little bit, but not by much. So you got that kind of space, or you want to use some kind of antenna, you can use, like at work, I got one for our Racey's amateur station, share station, that's an Alpha Delta, and I think they call it the Long Band Plus, and it's good, it's really heavy duty, it seems to play well, you need a tuner obviously, and it has traps, so okay, people will say, you know, you're going to lose energy in the traps and all that, but I got it up at 100 feet, so it seems to work pretty well.
I have a question while you're on 160. I just put up a window, off-center fed, full-length 160. Everybody says to put it up as a inverted V. But then if you really start digging into the web, they said, no, a flat top will work just as well. What's your feeling?
Well, for DX, I would want to go flat top if I could. I've never had great luck with inverted V's. And for me, it seems intuitive that you're going off, perpendicular to that, low angle. If it's like that, you're going to get patterns where you're going to, have radiation like that off it. And for NVIS, you can use either, but I would say flat top for NVIS as well. We're going to see that in a second. Okay. 80 or 160 meters, you're not going to use it during the day because D-layer absorption is going to wipe you out. It's going to suck up the signal. You're not going to really, because D-layer absorption, I'm not sure if it's up here. Yeah, it says right there that D-layer absorption is worse for the lower frequencies. It affects the lower frequencies worse than the upper frequencies. So you got to use lower frequencies. During the day, you've got it, so you want to go as high as you can during the day to offset some of that D-layer absorption so you're up, 15 megahertz if you can, 40 megahertz. Okay, and around 60 meters to be your, switch hitter frequency. Antennas. You need high-angle radiation. You need high-angle radiation for NDIS. But that's not a problem. How many people have dipoles? How many people have wire antennas for HF? Just about all of you. You all have NVIS antennas. I'm going to bet. I'll buy you a coffee after the meeting if I'm wrong. Okay? What? Okay. Verticals are poor for NDIS. They're terrible for NDIS. They're not that great for HF in general. They happen to be what was primarily used in World War II for HF, believe it or not. And the military is still capable of using, and they still do use verticals, even though some of us try to tell them they're a little nuts, but they're still using verticals to some extent. They're very poor for HF in general, and they're horrible for NVIS. Because they're very low angle to the point of ground wave. Okay? All right. Textbook says that you need to be half a wavelength above the ground in order to generate good low angle, low takeoff angle radiation. Okay? But if you lower it to a quarter wavelength from the ground, you get that ground's going to start reflecting the energy up vertically. Okay, by the way, what's half a wavelength for 80 meters? 40 meters. And I'll be wrong, that's about around 130 feet off the ground? So if you want true DX, true low-angle performance from a flat-top 80-meter dipole, get it up to 130 feet minimum. How many people can do that? Any of you got your dipoles at or above 130 feet off the ground? You owe me a coffee. You all, therefore, most of you are where? Yeah, most of you are at a quarter wavelength above the ground. Ideal for NVIS. But I've seen them as high as effective. They are effective down to 6 to 4 feet above the ground. Now you got a problem. You get below about 6 to 4 feet. I've seen people putting on traffic cones. They'll run a wire on traffic cones. What's the problem with that? If you're not doing something, what's the problem with that? You start to get coupling to the ground, right? So you take a piece of wire and you run it underneath those traffic cones as a reflector. And now you can run it on the top of traffic cones. Now that you can put it on top of, well, the military often does a split rail fence. They'll run the wire off on a split rail fence, and then they'll run another wire on the ground underneath the split rail fence. That's their antenna system for HF in the military. They'll string it out real quick, real dirty. They'll throw it on a roof if they use, especially using NVIS. So, as I said, it's too low, and the Earth begins to absorb. You begin coupling and shorting into the Earth, so you need a reflector, a wire, piece of wire, or a metal roof. Something like that. Not too low, though, with the metal roof. The wire is best. So vertical. Gives you no high angle. This is a vertical antennas. This is a chart for a vertical antenna. Really low angle. Really low angle. Textbooks, we just talked about that. Half a wavelength. That would be pretty high. 160? That would be pretty high. Anybody got a couple of skyscrapers they want to string their 160 antenna between? But now you got at textbook height. Look at how low. Look at how low the takeoff angle at textbook height. You're not even 45. The center of this lobe is at about 30 degrees. And what did I say for DX early in the presentation? Ideal. Okay, so you're 130 feet or so, or roughly 120, 130, 140 feet above the ground. Yeah. You got Battleship Massachusetts, and you're up in the rigging. You got your HF antenna. Yeah. Along with seawater all around you and a bunch of steel. But, okay. When you lower, the angle gets higher and higher and higher. We just talked about that. Quarter wavelength above the ground, or about 50 feet, like we usually do, 30 or 50 feet. Getting lower causes efficiency loss, and you get real low, you need some kind of reflector. Okay, but in practice, a quarter to an eighth wave, a wavelength above the ground is best for NVIS. And that's
Quick question.
Mhm.
The wire, so if you're going really low, the wire need to be coupled anywhere?
No. You just need to no.
Just lay it out.
Just lay it out like a reflector. Like it should be like a reflector on a directional antenna is not necessarily electrically connected to the rest of the antenna.
So if we're using the dipole at 35, 40 feet on 40 meters, just lay out a hunk of wire.
Not necessarily. What you might do, and there are websites to talk about this, you might want to suspend the wire above the ground closer to the antenna. So if you're up at 30 feet, you might, at 15 feet, 20 feet, you might put a piece of wire directly underneath it. If you want to get that high angle now, well, you improve the high angle, which means your DX will be a little less on that particular antenna. So you might be disappointed in your DX performance. Okay. Okay. Now, we drop that to 0.15 meters above the ground, wavelengths above the ground. Look what we got. High angle, perfect. And it's a dipole. It's not any fancy antenna. The dipole is essentially a monoband antenna, and I say this for the military folks. We know we can put a tuner on it. But there are a couple of special high-gain single band antennas, dipole with a reflector. Okay? It's called the Shirley antenna, the Shirley antenna. You look it up on the internet, Shirley antenna is one. The Jamaica is another. Look it up on the internet. And there we see. Driven element and another piece of wire, the reflector on near the ground, or at some point. Again, dropping below it, that optimum 0.15 wavelengths for perfect NDIS or better, as best we can get.
But not connected.
Not connected in any way, no. You'll notice insulators down here to the pole, and no electrical connection to it or to ground. Not necessarily great. You don't, just let it out there. It's just now as the energy comes down, it starts the energy, get energized and bounces it back up. It's just like a direction. You take and make it a directional antenna, it goes straight up.
Parasitic element on the Yagi.
Yep, parasitic element on the Yagi. Absolutely, perfect analogy. Whoops. Okay, so we got that. Shirley. That's a Shirley. You can look it up. They usually that's a half wavelength. If you look at it quick, you'd think this is something you can hold up like a fox hunt antenna. No, these things are half a wavelength, and the height is 20. The center of it is 20 to 30 feet off the ground, and they're half a wavelength apart. So it's a big antenna, but that's the Shirley. A Jamaica looks like that. Now, a company that builds a Jamaica is it's the Bushmaster out of Australia. They make one of these. It ain't cheap. I think they're like $1,500 or more, $2,000. But government buys a lot. And if you're in a sheep station and you need good communication, your government, whatever.
It's a single band.
It's single banded, but that one may be for ALE. It may be wide banded. They have a wideband version of this. Bushmaster has a wide-banded version of this for ALE, automatic link establishment, which requires, it sweeps the frequencies too quickly to use a tuner. So, multiband. At least 3 different bands, so you want an antenna that hopefully can do multiple bands. And long wire, inverted L, inverted V, doublet. These are ones you could use. Other multi-band antennas. Anybody been to Framingham? Mass Emergency Management, Framingham. It's what they have. We used to have several of these as receivers. Fan antenna. It's an NVIS antenna. The EOC with the exception now of soon to be, New Hampshire soon to be if he puts it up, and Vermont EOC. Vermont has an antenna 50 feet above the ground, so it's still a little NVIS, but it's pretty high. They're getting good DX off of that, good long range communication off that. But with that exception, Rhode Island's running a purpose-built NVIS antenna. Rhode Island EOC, Maine EOC, Massachusetts is using the fan. Connecticut is using, another one I'll show you. Okay, this one's a famous one among the aficionados of NVIS in ham. This is the Collins AS, or Antenna System 2259. This is circa Vietnam. They began producing these, primarily for use in the PRC-47, the AN PRC-47 HF set. in Vietnam. And basically, it's an NBS antenna. There are a couple of websites where you can build your own, because you can buy they're getting to be like hen's teeth, and to buy a complete one's difficult. And also, this pole is like slides together. And anybody seen a 2259? Well, that's how the center conductor and the outer shield get connected. They push them together. Press fit, and they get tarnished, they get loose, and you're getting lost up through the center. The thing's only about 12, maybe about 15 feet high. Now, you can do the old doublet, and you can jumper it. Your hands have been doing that for generations. Since Hiram Maxim's time, you could do that if you wanted a multi-band antenna. Okay. And this, anybody know what this is? The dummy load. The famous dummy load. This is the Barker Williamson, BWS 59, I think. Now, that's the Barker Williamson, by the way, is it Connecticut EOC has one of these. Vermont has one, it's at 50 feet. We put it up at 50 feet, so it's doing pretty well. New Hampshire just got one to replace their antenna. They're going to do an inverted V because that's how they can do it off their public safety tower. But the top of theirs will be over 100 feet. And the bottom will be about 45 feet. So they're going to get pretty good, they're going to get some long range out of that as well. So.
How is it on 160?
It doesn't play. 6 meters to 80 meters. See, the reason for that is you'll never see, or you rarely see a military or government antenna that goes below 80 meters because we generally don't use it. Your commercial radios, military radios, government radios don't have 160 meter band on them. The lowest we can operate on through NTIA, except certain military applications, is 2 megahertz. So they don't make antennas. You're not going to get a 160 unless you make it yourself because we have no use for it. You can use a whip, but you can't use it vertical. Don't use it vertical. You want to bend the whip. How many people have seen pictures of Gulf War or Hummers operating a rack? And where they got it bent down or they got it pulled down? That's NDIS. You see a vehicle like that, it's got an HF radio in it, because that would be crappy for FM. Fox Mike VHF. If you see an antenna, military Humvee running around with what we call it the rat tail look, where it's bent like that, that's homebrew. They're just bending down the antenna and tying it off. And they're running NDIS. There's an HF radio in that rig. An HF radio. Yeah, but they might be running the old 45 megahertz band, maybe. We used to do that with, pardon?
31 megahertz.
So the 31 megahertz?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. And maybe
And they're bending it over so they don't smack it.
Okay.
But they don't know.
But they don't know that, but they may well be getting NBIS for. Okay, you've seen that in pictures of the first Iraq War and the second Iraq War. You've seen that, and it's being used in Afghanistan extensively. NBIS is being used in Afghanistan. It's being used by military advisors and contractors to the Afghans because the Army doesn't understand how it works and doesn't want to use it. You know, if it ain't a satellite, you know, number one, they don't know how to use it. And number two, if it's HF, it's got to have a vertical whip, right? Okay, so you want to bend it back as much as you can at 45. And I'm talking to military operators here, but be careful when you maneuver the darn thing. You're going to poke somebody's eye out, or you're going to break the antenna. Keep your distance. And you can use loops. Fore and after magnetic, and we'll have pictures of those. And as I say to the military and government operators, beware of HF, of getting an HF bite, an HF burn from antennas on vehicles. Okay, Shakespeare, this mates with a standard screw-type military antenna mount for an HF rig on a Humvee, on a truck, on a tank, but usually tanks don't have HF, but a lot of Humvees do. All it is, just a spring-loaded pin where they can adjust the angle so they don't have to bend it and possibly break the antenna. And they can just bend it over to a 90 degree if they so need, or 45, so they don't have to tie it off with the rat tail. They can just bend it and then the antenna screws in the top. It's just an adapter. Okay. Codan Company, it's a British Commonwealth radio company. They built an antenna. Here's the base. There's a swivel. Tie it off. You'll see the British military, their Defenders, their Land Rover Defenders and stuff. You'll see NSUVs using these things as well, scout cars and such. 4.5 loop. Well, there's somebody. That's one of the hand Nivis folks using that. And of course, it's up here. A little harder to see that one. Somebody using one on an RV, made it out of PVC to support it. And the Russians, as I said, they're using zenith radiation propagation. Those 2 loops are NVIS antennas for HF. Russian military's used it for decades. And you'll find out in a minute where they learned it from. Okay? This Aussie style, that's a commercial, little QMAC. It's a little fuzzy, but that's a company called QMAC, and they make those, they fold down so you can, put it in the garage or what have you. But that's for the Aussies, again, they're using a lot of HF, and they've adopted NVIS extensively for bush communications. Redneck style. Try going under a bridge or whatever in that. Try knocking that down easy enough. But it's that is an NVIS magnetic loop NVIS antenna. And you can find, on the internet, you want to put one on your truck, you can. Okay. USMC rat tail, that comes right out of their manual of how to do that. Comes right out of the manual, Skywave. The Marines, from Vietnam on. Number one, why do you think the Marines were aggressive in going after HF and NVIS? They can't afford satellite time. They're the Marines. The Marines have the oldest cast-off junk that nobody else wants. They are in most times, you ask any Marine, basically they are the red-headed stepchild of the U.S. military. They can't get satellite bandwidth time. They can't get satellite-equipped radios that can interrogate satellites. Can't afford them. They're using PRC 25s, not so much, but PRC 77s from Vietnam in the Gulf War. When everybody else is starting to transition to SINGARs. They were using that up in the 90s and the 2000s. So, it's a lot cheaper and more effective than satellite time. Because if you're in Afghanistan, have you seen how steep some of those notches are? I forget up there. If you've seen there's a really moving documentary called Rostropo, and it's about a Marine or Army company out in Afghanistan, and it's just like this. They're down in the bottom of a gorge like this. Well, and it's basically, how do you get to a satellite if that's the only portion of the sky you see? That's the problem they're finding. And also, basically if you're using telemetry to fly a drone and two-way video, you're sucking up a lot of satellite bandwidth. Okay. Nimitz in World War II. In D-Day, they needed to communicate with the forward elements on the beach. And they wanted to have instantaneous or near as close as they could, close air support for the troops on the ground. At that time, the troops on the ground, there were not a lot of forward air controllers. They did not have airband radios. And most of their radios, we were only, in 1944 D-Day, we were only transitioning from 80 meter AM. That's what the walkie-talkies were, that famous walkie-talkie, the square one, 80 meter AM with a whip antenna. You're lucky if you get across the building. Okay? So they needed a way to communicate back to England where all the tactical air was being dispatched out using powerful airband radios from England. So they asked Dr. Beveridge, Harold Beveridge, of what the antenna is named after, to create a system of communications so between the command ship and tactical air command headquarters, so they could talk, and he basically devised an NVIS system for them. It was very effective. But then the U.S. military forgot about it. The Germans used it from before the war began. Okay? Never saw on D-Day. Ever see a German vehicle with this? That's a German scout armored car. You ever see World War II photos with a bed frame on the top? That's an NVIS antenna. You never knew what it was until the end of the war. They were using NVIS for their scout communications when they get way out ahead of their armored formations to call back using not VHF radio, NVIS, HF. That's where the Russians got their ideas for them to start using what they called zenith radiation. A little humor for you. Okay, if you can use voice, you can use any other form of communication. You can use Olivia, especially effective if you've got noisy conditions, weak signal conditions and NVIS. Well, you can use some of these digital modes. PSK31 and Olivia would be highly effective, even if we have not the greatest propagation. Highly effective at low power. They don't require high power for voice, and the military is all over this because you got two things going for you. You got low power, and you have NVIS propagation that isn't spreading out thousands of miles, so it's harder for them to be direction finding on them if they're using NVIS. And that's why the Air Force used it in Vietnam, and Special Forces used it in Vietnam, so there wouldn't be DF, direction finding location by the enemy. So with 25 watts, you can have phone coverage out to 250 statute miles. Very like VHF on good conditions. It's like a VHF radio. ALE can be used as a sampling method. You can basically see we use this. Okay, here's some websites. Basically, the top one is ionograms for the whole world. You choose where you want to go, and you pick the ionogram, and they refresh every 5 minutes, and it's all over the world. So the military uses it, commercial operators use it. Space weather, Australian space weather site. It puts up these real simple to understand colored maps, and you can get one for the Boston area. Okay, the Australian space weather site, I think, is better than the NOAA weather site. It's a beautiful site. Again, HF radio is critical for their government and civil communications. And so HF conditions are very critical. There's a Millstone Hill ion zone. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. They kind of lost their big, huge Air Force contract, and they're kind of keeping it alive as best they can. And, all the hams that use this say, hey, we really love that site. And they said, do you realize how expensive it is for us to maintain this? We're running out of money. We don't keep this alive for the hams, So, worldwide lists. Band conditions, this is a great one. It tells you DX conditions, local conditions, and it's a dashboard. Red, yellow, green on the different bands. Look at a band, it's a red, well, no, not good for propagation. Yellow, green, okay, it's good for DX, it's good for propagation. Great site. Then there was from the League, Homebrew AS2259. I built one of these. I've yet to get it to work properly, but I think I've got the solution. But I built an AS2259.
That with these on.
I'm going to, you can download this whole presentation, and then if you put it on the club website, you can check these out, or you can, print them out and hand them out to you next time. I didn't do this today. I should have done this. I apologize. So Homebrew, Nivis sites, Bushmaster, their site, some of their commercial antennas. Helomast, another company. HiQ is an American company. They make a lot of for the military. Nivis antennas for the military. TacLink, they're a group of amateurs that are really into NVIS and emergency management communications. HFALE, they talk a lot about, that's the HAM, Automatic Link Establishment Organization, and they talk a lot about NVIS topics. Okay, U.S. Army Field Manual online discussing NVIS techniques and antennas and how you can do it. Okay, summary. You want to use 0 to 250 statuette miles using high-angle skywave to get reliable local communications. The choice of the critical frequency is critical. The FO, F2 frequency is critical to your operational technique to understand it and use it. Antenna must be horizontal, not vertical. Vertical antennas are very poor for NVIS technique. They must be low, between 1/4 to 1.5 to 0.15 wavelengths off the ground. An NVIS antenna by nature is an omnidirectional radiator. It's more omni than most antennas. It can be multi-banded, and you need to have multi-band capability. You either need multiple antennas, 3 antennas, or you need a multi-band antenna for 24/7. It offers less of a footprint, which the military is concerned about for direction finding. Questions? Okay, so that's the discussion of NVIS, and this is the kind of discussion, you know, the military looks at, government communications looks at, but all these are useful both for DX and NVIS communications for hams. Kevin, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Great presentation, so thank you all for coming. John, thank you for the
Okay.
presentation. Offline and
Yeah, we're gonna shut this down for all your home summer. I don't even know if anybody's watching. And yeah,
Okay, I don't know if you want that on your computer to copy it, so you can either